Vampire tales have gained immense popularity in modern times, especially around the end of the winter. It's notable that vampire themes often emerge during this time, particularly in events like the Venetian Carnival. These festivals, famous for their elaborate masks and costumes, frequently feature vampire-inspired attire, reflecting the enduring fascination with these mythical creatures. The connection between the vampires and the festive, mysterious atmosphere of carnivals like Venice's is clear, highlighting the vampire's continued relevance in culture. These stories often depict vampires as exotic, rather than purely terrifying. This portrayal can be traced back to the 19th century, with Bram Stoker's Dracula being a prime example. Here, the vampire is portrayed as a seductive, intelligent being, capable of luring both men and women to their downfall with cunning strategies. Dracula, the character, manages to live as a Transylvanian lord while concealing his vampiric nature. However, the origins of these 19th century vampire stories, including that of Dracula, raise questions. Were these enthralling tales of Romanian vampires purely literary creations, or did they stem from more ancient sources? In my exploration of medieval and ancient European texts and tombs, I aim to uncover the true origins of the vampire myth. Bram Stoker, a renowned Irish author, is celebrated for modernizing the vampire concept through his portrayal of Dracula. He loosely connected his character to Vlad the Impaler, though Dracula was predominantly a product of Stoker's imagination. Stoker devoted considerable time to studying Eastern European folklore before writing his novel. European literature since the 17th century has often pondered over vampires, with notable figures like Voltaire commenting on their existence. In 1819, English writer John Polidori published a significant work, The Vampyre, featuring Lord Ruthven, a character resembling Stoker's Dracula. Polidori's story, set in Greece rather than Transylvania, depicts the vampire as seductive, elite, and intelligent, with a penchant for corruption before committing murder. Stoker's work, in contrast, integrates more folkloric elements, addressing themes of good and evil, which Polidori largely overlooks. An intriguing aspect of Stoker's narrative is its alignment with Greek and Romanian folklore, where vampires begin as mortals, similar to witches or sorcerers. In Central and Eastern Europe during the Middle Ages and early modern period, vampires were not mere characters in stories but were believed to be real entities. To thoroughly investigate the origins of vampire legends and the inspirations for writers like Bram Stoker, it is essential to delve into the etymology and historical context of the term vampire itself. The term vampire is not of Romanian origin, a fact that may surprise some. In Romanian, the word for vampire is actually strigoi, which likely traces back to the Greek strix, meaning screecher. This term originally referred to a screech owl, but also signified an ill-omened bird or a witch in ancient times, offering a clue to the concept's ancient roots. However, the word vampire itself is derived from Slavic languages. In Russian, a similar creature is referred to as upir, and variations of this word appear across most Slavic languages. Although some once thought the term was borrowed from Turkic languages, this theory has largely been dismissed. It's possible that the influence was in the opposite direction, with the Tartars adopting the word ubir to mean a witch. The word vampire seems to originate from Proto-Slavic, roughly translating to flyer. Looking at the Romanian, Roman, and Greek stigai, we find it linked to the owl but also, in some contexts, to a witch or a vampire. Thus, vampire likely denotes a flying creature, and stigoi refers specifically to an owl. Despite being different words, they seem to share a similar origin. This is comparable to the English werewolf, derived from volk, wolf, and dulk, pelt or hair, indicating a wolf pelt. This construction, while slightly different, shares the same meaning as the Germanic werewolf, suggesting an Indo-European root for these concepts. In contrast, the vampire is often associated with sorcery and witchcraft. In some European cultures, there might have been a shared notion of a creature transforming into a deadly nocturnal bird. A key trait of the vampire in various interpretations is its consumption of human blood or flesh. The earliest references to the dead needing blood come from Homer's Odyssey. In this epic, Odysseus travels to the land of the dead to seek knowledge from the deceased seer Tiresias. Before speaking to Odysseus, the spirits, including the ghosts of his mother, Achilles, and Agamemnon, must drink the blood of a sacrificed goat. This blood enables them to recall their lives and communicate with Odysseus, drawn to it as moths to a flame. Tiresias, due to his exceptional abilities, is the only spirit who can recognize and speak to Odysseus before consuming the blood. Similar to its fictional portrayal, the vampire is believed to need blood to maintain its strength. This concept extends beyond literary traditions. In ancient European practices, blood sacrifices were sometimes made to deceased heroes, often at their grave sites during the night. There was a prevalent belief that the dead required sustenance. The Bell-Beaker culture, an Indo-European group, buried individuals with food as early as 2400 BC. While this might be interpreted symbolically, ancient beliefs and folklore suggest that this food was intended for consumption by the spirit of the deceased. The Romans continued this tradition, leaving offerings like cakes, grains, or milk at graves, believing these nourish the spirits of their departed loved ones. In some extreme cases, tombs were designed with holes through, which food could be passed, a practice evidenced in medieval Irish accounts. This concept of appeasing the hunger of the dead is integral to understanding the origins of the vampire myth. Unplacated, the hungry dead were feared to leave their resting places in search of food. While Homer's Odyssey describes spirits consuming blood, the mechanism remains a mystery. However, other folklore, such as stories about the Norse Draugr and various Gaelic tales, depict corpses rising from the grave. These beings, dwelling in burial mounds, were believed to have the ability to leave their graves, much like vampires. The Draugr, for instance, could shapeshift into forms like seals and enter people's dreams, preferring the night but not harmed by daylight, similar to vampires. To defeat a Draugr, one might have to wrestle it back to its grave or behead it, as in many vampire stories. These beings were viewed as conscious and intelligent, not mere zombies, but were still tied to their physical corpses. The antiquity of these beliefs is uncertain, but they undoubtedly predate written records and might have influenced burial practices. The sealing of tombs beneath stones was not just a matter of status, it also acted as a prison for the corpse, offering more security than burial in the earth alone. In historical practices, there have been instances of people being buried in unusual ways, indicative of a fear that these corpses might still be a threat. For example, bodies were sometimes found buried face down, bound, or with heavy stones placed on them, or even with stones jammed into their mouths post-mortem. These practices suggest a fear of the dead rising or causing harm. Roman and Greek texts mention that Germanic and Celtic people would visit grave mounds to communicate with the dead. They would sleep on these mounds to receive dreams or visions from the deceased, a concept also reflected in some Old Norse sagas. Similarly, the Norse god Odin is depicted as seeking knowledge from a dead seeress, as the dead were believed to possess great knowledge about past and future events. This view aligns with the depiction of vampires as highly intelligent beings, consistent with other European legends. The oldest Samhain or Halloween story from Ireland is about a man named Nera. He is dared to tie a loop around the foot of a hanged man at night. The dead man then speaks to Nera, demanding to be taken to a house for a drink. The dead man drinks from all the water containers in the house and then spits the water into the mouths of the sleeping inhabitants, killing them. This story advises against leaving water basins, slop pails, or unguarded fires when sleeping, for fear that the walking dead might enter and use these items to cause harm. The story humorously notes the difficulty of adapting this advice to modern toilet designs, suggesting that closing the toilet lid might be wise, especially on Samhain. Regarding Draugr and Gaelic revenants, there is a belief that they could spread disease and sickness, perhaps linked to the corruption and uncleanliness associated with death. While knowledge of germs is a modern understanding, ancient peoples recognized that uncleanliness was often associated with sickness and death. Consequently, various ritual practices evolved to express this idea, often involving physical cleansing rituals to purify oneself from wrongdoings, as seen in many pagan traditions. Even in Christianity, the act of baptism with water symbolizes a ritual cleansing, signifying the removal of sins. The concept of evil, often manifesting in various forms, is associated with the spread of disease and sickness, which tend to worsen at night or in darkness. The flu season, coinciding with winter and extended periods of darkness, is a time when crops die off and the sun weakens, linking these natural occurrences to a broader dualistic notion of the cosmic cycle. While the vampire shares similarities with other European undead beings, it also possesses unique characteristics. In Greek, the term for vampire is vrikolakas. Interestingly, this term is not of Greek origin but Slavic, and it actually means werewolf rather than vampire. This confusion arises in some Slavic regions, like Croatia, where the word is used to refer to both vampires and werewolves. This likely stems from earlier associations we explored in etymology, connecting one figure with owls and flight and another with wolves. Over time, in some cultures, these separate entities have become intertwined or mixed, as seen in vampire literature where vampires are said to transform into wolves and bats, merging the characteristics of werewolves and vampires into a single creature. The Greek concept of a vampire differs in that it does not specifically drink blood, but devours human flesh. These beings are also linked to the spread of disease or plague, unexplained ailments, or sudden deaths, as are many vampires in various cultures. Historical accounts from Moravia, now part of the Czech Republic, describe vampires as appearing to acquaintances shortly after their own death, with those who saw them dying within a few days. When the bodies of suspected vampires were exhumed, they were often found soft, colorful, and undecayed but emitting a terrible smell. To deal with a suspected vampire, the body would be beheaded, staked through the heart, and then burned. In Hungary and Romania, there are similar accounts of vampire incidents. In one notable case, a man's father, who had been deceased for 10 years, reportedly joined him at the dining table, only for the man to be found dead the following day. Upon exhumation, the father's body was in pristine condition, with blood similar to that of a living person. The corpse was subsequently beheaded. In another instance, a man who had been dead for 30 years rose and allegedly killed his brother, his nephew, and their servant by draining their blood from the neck, causing instant death. This vampire met his end, with a spike driven through his temple. From Transylvania, historical records suggest that vampires could drain blood from the living, much like leeches, gorging themselves to the point where blood would ooze from their eyes and seep through their skin pores, leaving them grotesquely swollen with blood. It is also said that those who were victimized by a vampire might themselves become vampires after death, although this wasn't always the case. One individual attempted to cure himself of vampirism by consuming soil from the vampire's grave, but this was futile. After his death, he was staked through the heart, eliciting a horrific scream, then decapitated, and his body burned. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it became common practice to perform such rituals on anyone suspected of potentially becoming a vampire after death, in an effort to break the cycle of vampirism. In one case, when a young girl died and was reported to have seen the dead child of a local man, it led to the discovery that consuming the meat of a cow that died of vampirism could also result in vampirism. The girl's body was exhumed, showed signs of vampirism, and was then beheaded, staked, and burned. Subsequently, 40 other bodies were exhumed. 17 exhibited signs of vampirism and were treated similarly. These actions in Romania were carried out under legal authority, with judicial sanction. There were actual laws in place for dealing with vampires, and there were professionals who specialized in this practice, akin to what we might call vampire hunters. The situation became even more complex when dealing with vampires that were once living. The term strigoi doesn't solely refer to an undead vampire, but also encompasses a living witch or sorcerer, some of whom are believed to send out their spirits at night to drink blood. While most commonly associated with Romania, the concept of the strigoi is recognized in various other Romance languages. For example, in French, strica refers to a bird woman who sucks blood, and in Italian, stregonin denotes a witch or sorcerer. The Greek language has strix, a term also present in Polish, likely borrowed from a Latin-based language during the Middle Ages, denoting a female demon or vampire-like creature. Bram Stoker, in his creation of Dracula, heavily drew from the Romanian strigoi myths. He opted for the term vampire in English due to its wider recognition and because, in many cultures, there wasn't a significant distinction between a strigoi and a vampire, with the terms often used interchangeably. However, notable differences do exist. Except in Romania, The strigoi is typically female and specifically refers to a witch, whereas vampires in many Slavic regions don't exclusively drink blood, instead consuming human flesh or killing victims without any physical contact. The specific act of drinking blood, particularly from the neck, is a minority feature in vampire tales. When a witch or sorcerer strigoi dies, they are believed to reanimate and gain more power. There are various ways one might become a strigoi: through an unholy life, improper burial practices, a curse, or by having their blood sucked by another strigoi. In many cases, contact with a moroi, or being killed by one, could also result in becoming a strigoi. Male vampires in Balkan countries were often thought to seek out women, driven by strong sexual desires, a theme prevalent in Dracula and earlier vampire fiction. The union of a vampire and a mortal woman could result in offspring known as Vampyres, who were believed to possess certain vampiric abilities without fully becoming vampires. In Romania, moroi are children born from the union of strigoi and normal women, often described as hideous and hairy. The specific powers and characteristics attributed to vampires vary over time and by region. However, one consistent aspect is that daylight is unlikely to offer protection from a real vampire attack. The vampire, while typically preferring the night, is not restricted to darkness. It could just as easily appear at noon, unexpectedly joining you at the breakfast table, potentially making you its next meal. Vampires can assume various forms, and their intelligence levels vary greatly, ranging from highly clever to more drone-like. People have been known to fall ill or even die from vampire encounters without any physical contact or blood draining. Sometimes, just seeing one is enough to forebode death. However, unless you have a familial connection to a vampire, your chances of being attacked are slimmer. In many historical accounts, vampires predominantly targeted their own family members, especially those closest to them. Vampires also exhibit a peculiar OCD-like behavior, similar to other beliefs about the dead. For instance, filling a vampire's grave with pebbles or small objects could trap them in an endless counting loop. Iron, like with fairies and the Gaelic seed, could repel them, as could garlic, which offers a fragrant shield. Large stakes are traditionally considered effective in trapping vampires beneath the earth. One unresolved mystery is how vampires, supposedly rising from their graves, leave no trace of disturbed soil. This conundrum led to theories that they might transform into mist to enter and exit their graves undetected. These enigmatic abilities place the vampire in a liminal space between a ghost and a ghoul, not entirely physical, yet simultaneously corporeal. This paradox was one of the criticisms leveraged by skeptical church officials and scholars in the 17th and 18th centuries, in an attempt to debunk the widespread obsession with vampires. The Catholic Church at that time often dismissed vampire beliefs as pagan superstitions, refusing to acknowledge their existence. In my perspective, it seems the concept of the vampire sometimes merges with that of a witch, acquiring unique characteristics but being heavily influenced by the Slavic vampire. Romania, surrounded by Slavic-speaking regions and intermittently governed by various Slavic groups, demonstrates this blend. Vlad the Impaler, often linked to Dracula, is a prime example. His name, Vladimir, has clear Slavic roots, as do many other Romanian names. However, the Romanian strigoi, though its name stems from the Roman strix, associated with the murderous witch and the ill-omened owl, has integrated aspects of the Slavic undead vampire. This Slavic influence likely evolved from figures akin to the Norse Draugr and other European mythological beings. I believe that the deaths attributed to vampires were more likely caused by diseases. But the question arises, why was there a sudden obsession with vampires during this period? My hypothesis centers on the concept of the hungry dead. The dead were no longer being appeased with offerings, a practice that European peoples had maintained for thousands of years. The Church's discontinuation of these rituals might have stirred significant anxiety about the state of the dead and their potential actions towards the living. This anxiety likely led to the dead appearing to their relatives in dreams or visions, driven by the living's fear, trepidation, and guilt, believing the dead could not rest in peace. This belief in vampires was so strong that people would exhume their relatives' graves, behead them, and drive stakes through their hearts, a gruesome task not undertaken lightly. Some theorize that the vampire myth originated from incidents of people being buried alive. Additionally, the post-mortem movements caused by nerve contractions and muscle spasms in corpses especially on battlefields, could be terrifying to witness and likely contributed to beliefs in the Walking Dead. Conclusion. It might be possible that some vampires did exist, but it's more likely that the majority of past vampire incidents were a result of widespread beliefs and convictions among people, rather than actual vampirism. This obsession with vampires serves as a stark reminder of the lengths to which people are willing to go to uphold an idea, dogma, belief, or ideology that has captivated their minds. Time and modernity haven't necessarily made humans more rational. Rather, we often cloak irrational beliefs under the guise of science, progress, or various other concepts, practicing them no differently in essence than those who exhumed their ancestors' graves to decapitate them and prevent another vampire attack. But what's your take on this? Do you believe the vampire legends are true? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share your vampire stories with us. Remember to give a like, thumbs up, and subscribe.